Oh, hello there, everyone. Patricia Hayes here. So excited to be here with you today for today's version of Coffee Time Career Chat. And for those of you who are joining for the first time, my name is Patricia Hayes. I am an executive advisor, empowerment coach, and authentic networking strategist, which means that I love helping people get to the next level of where they want to be and to make sure they do it, maximizing their professional relationships in a way that is authentic and purposeful. So glad to be here with you today. We are continuing our conversation about self advocacy and advocacy in general when it comes to building out our professional careers and helping others and things like that. And last week, I believe we started talking about self advocacy and speaking up for yourself specifically. And now we're going to continue that conversation because we're going to talk about it in terms of doing it at work. And I understand that this probably makes a few people hyperventilate. You're like, yeah, no, that's not going to happen. That doesn't work. That doesn't look good. And it's like, it can be done. It has to be done sometimes. And so you might as well get prepared for it so that you can be ready for when it happens. Because at some point in time, you're going to need to speak up for yourself. And if you don't, you're going to regret it or pay the price for it down the road. Okay. Because there is a price to be paid when you don't speak up for yourself in the workplace, in your community, in those things that you're involved in. All right, there is advantage to it. Most of the time, people focus on the negative piece, right? Especially when they think it's confrontational. You know, speaking up for yourself does not have to be confrontational. Hello, that's a perception. It also, when it thinks it's like, oh, I'm going to hurt someone's feelings. Well, yeah, sometimes that happens, right? But that still doesn't negate the fact that you should speak up when it's appropriate and when it needs to be done. Okay. So a lot of times, a lot of this is a lot of mindset stuff that we're not going to get too deep into here today. Those are for some other conversations we've had, but recognize that you do need to check your mindset when you are engaged in making a lot of excuses about why you cannot speak up for yourself, when in actuality, we need to be thinking through why I should and why it's necessary as a part of my professional growth. Okay, here's a reality of it. Speaking up and being an advocate matters. It matters because it's very empowering. It gives you the confidence you need to move forward. It helps people to respect boundaries, maybe where there weren't any before. And ultimately, it is the sign of someone who's growing into being a leader. Okay. Leaders know how to influence people. And part of influencing people is being able to motivate, inspire, and guide them. And we guide people by our actions every single day, the actions we take as well as the ones that we do not take. All right. So I want you to be mindful of that when you're thinking about this whole speaking up for yourself at work piece. You know, I have tons of stories of where this has happened throughout my professional career. I may drop in a few here or there. Some of them you've heard before, maybe. Some of them maybe not. But the point of the matter is you have to start somewhere. I know and that's the first one, start small. Okay. And it's something that may be small to me, may not be so small to you. So, it's all relative. Don't say, don't base it on what someone else defines it. This is what works for you. Okay. Remember that piece about being authentic to yourself and being true to yourself while you're speaking up. And that, what works for one person doesn't have to work for you, may not work for you, very well may not be. It could be disastrous. All right. So be mindful and respectful of yourself. Little note here, my brand new coffee, my brand new mug. Y'all love this. I love it. I went to YWA event this weekend and spoke. It was so awesome. So that's my shout out to the Austin Young Women's Alliance. Okay. So here we go. When you're starting small, the point is It doesn't have to be some big fantastic thing, all right? Um, it could be as simple as correcting someone when they misspeak or misrepresent your work or something you said in a meeting, right? We can this can happen. I mean, hello, we're doing a lot of this and via, a lot of communication via email and virtual. So you want to be extremely mindful of how your words come across, especially when you write them down. But that doesn't mean it shouldn't happen. Okay. But when you're in a virtual meeting or when you're in an in-person meeting, whatever, if there's something that's said and they're like, oh yeah, Patricia said blah, 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 and this last thing, and it's a little off or it's something that's not quite right, then you can say, oh yeah, thanks, Sam, for mentioning that. I just want to say a little bit of a correction because what I meant by that was X, right? Do you see how that flowed? That's something that you can do, all right? Um, whether it's verbally, whether it's, one-on-one or in a group. And yes, I say start small. This is because you have to recognize when it's happening and when you have an opportunity to speak up on your behalf in a way that will, what's the way? Be supportive. Right. So this is not about getting out there and trying to be, the superstar or something like that. That's not what I'm talking about. But I am talking about there are way too many times, especially for women, when we're in meetings and someone will go and speak up, say something that's not accurate or that leaves off a part of the story or that takes an idea that you put out there, right? Those are the ones that start getting a little bit tougher, but they're also very easily fixed by just making a simple statement. All right. I know when I was a baby lawyer, my first job out of law school, I was representing teachers and it required travel around the state. And it required travel at night. And oftentimes I was traveling alone. So I was this, late 20s, early 30s, Black female driving across Texas and doing hearings in local school districts in the evening representing my clients. Well, here's the thing is the guys, because they had all the, majority have been men before, lawyers, they would get in the car after it and drive home. And I was not comfortable with that. There were a couple of situations in particular. I was like, I need to go stop somewhere. I'm like, I was scared to death getting in the car, driving home after, a hearing that may end at 9, 10 o'clock at night. And sometimes I may have like a 2, 3 hour drive ahead of me. Right. So after one of those moments when I was extremely uncomfortable, I went to my boss and I said, hey, I cannot do that anymore. Or there another option because I am not comfortable as a young Black female driving at all hours of the night alone. And they were like, oh my gosh, why didn't you say something, sooner? And it was because it hadn't clicked and because I hadn't said anything. But the moment I said something, boop, not a problem. Let's go. What do we need to do? Shifted my budget as a young lawyer to allow for me to spend the night when I needed to, when something came up late or whatever. I had the opportunity to be able to find a safe space, find a hotel room, spend the night, and get up and come in the morning. Right? All I had to do was say, all I do was speak up. Okay. Those are the moments that I'm talking about. Right. There are others where, as the baby lawyer, sometimes it's kind of like getting shoved around. It's like, oh, you don't have to, well, you have to do it this way. And I'm like, really? Who said that? I don't recall that. Right. And questioning is a great way because sometimes that's a thing. Right. Where you're just asking a question in response to an action that's being taken. And sometimes that's enough to put someone back or to step aside because they recognize maybe that wasn't quite true. Maybe they were trying to manipulate you. We'll talk about that in a second, whatever. But you have to start small, start somewhere if you're not already doing it. It's not going to be comfortable for everyone. But it's okay. Do it scared. Be brave. Be courageous. speak up. All right. Start thinking about where those moments are. I highly recommend, y'all know I love my journaling piece, but I highly recommend that you take some time to reflect on where those opportunities are for you. Where are those moments where you would regret it that you didn't speak up, or where you didn't think about it, but you recognize now this is something I probably should have spoken up about or said or responded to, right? This is not about beating yourself up. This is about honest reflection, because when you reflect and engage in what you're doing and what you are not doing, that allows you to have perspective and awareness now, so that you can respond differently in the future. Right? That's the point of the reflection time. Okay. Number two, the second thing is that speaking up does not always equal confrontation. This is probably the most the the reason that's given the most time why people won't speak up, because they're afraid of someone's response. Okay. Speaking up sometimes is merely about stating the facts. It's not even getting into the opinions of something. Or, if someone disagrees, but it doesn't mean a disagreement does not equal confrontation. Voicing your opinion that's contrary to another person does not automatically equate to confrontation. Okay, especially in the workplace. Now, here's where most people get taken, especially women, is when you're dealing with bullies, because the reality is that there are bullies in the workplace, bullies in your industry, especially if you're a female working in a predominantly male field still to this day. There are people who will bully you. Next, bullies generally are pretty easy to spot. The next one are the ones that are harder, right? The manipulators. They're the worst. These are the ones who will smile and whatever. And then you get public with someone, they're just kind of massage things a different way. And you're like, what just happened here? Right? They say something different. They act differently. They try to put you in a spot, put you on the spot, right? And so, but even that, it doesn't necessarily have to equate to a confrontation. If you're dealing with a situation that's relatively factual, you can be like, oh, yeah, thanks for reminding me of that. As I recall from the meeting that we had, here was my recollection of how things went down. Okay. It's not always going to be easy. I'm not saying that. So speaking up for yourself doesn't have to be easy. It also doesn't have to be a confrontation every single time. This becomes when you start using your judgment. Remember, I talk about, being open and going with your gut. Like a lot of times we know it's like, that's not right. Something's not right there. Right. And being respectful of that and listening to yourself and having that discerning spirit and that discerning mindset where you can recognize where something's going awry. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have to jump up and be like, oh, that's not right. It could be, you know what? Let me marinate on this. And then you give a response. Or maybe it is something that's more difficult that we'll talk about in a second, and it's going to require a little bit more. But it doesn't always equal confrontation. And that is the key thing that we have to move away from, because otherwise there are people who will never speak up for themselves because they consider every time that there's an opportunity to speak up as it's going to be confrontational. Therefore, I am not going to speak up. It takes practice, which is the third point. If you do not practice speaking up, you are never going to be able to learn how to handle not just those simple situations, but the more difficult ones. One of the things you can do while you're practicing is observing how others respond to things in a meeting. When you see someone else that's correcting, that's being corrected in a meeting or in an email, recognizing those things, or you're like, yeah, no, that's not good. That's not healthy. That's not a great response, right? And acknowledge that that's not how I would want to respond, right? This is how you practice. This is how you grow. You observe, you have conversations, not stirring up mess, but just say, hey, I noticed something's going on. Like, how would you handle a situation that looks like this? Right? These are opportunities for learning. Okay. So those are all things, there's just the things that feed on themselves, and practicing. I won't say makes perfect because I don't believe in perfection, but practicing does build confidence. It does help to build up your courage muscle, and to be able your courage and your comfort muscle, right? So that you can be able to speak up, be more empowered in how you confront situations, and to know that regardless of how it turns out, you know that you did and you honored what needed to be done. Which gets us to the fourth point, which is, you know it does not hurt that when you do have a truly sticky situation, one that is probably truly going to get confrontational or has the potential for it, to seek advice for those truly difficult situations, but be willing to stand firm. Stand firm on your convictions. All right. This is part of being an advocate for yourself, is recognizing when something's going on, recognizing when a boundary is crossed, recognizing when there's been some level of disrespect shown or lack of acknowledgement about something, and then speaking up about it and standing firm on it. Right. Again, it doesn't have to be nasty and all of that. Let that be someone else's response. I know I've dealt with several situations in recent months that I would have preferred not to have to deal with. Let's just be honest, right? There are a couple I'm thinking of right now. I was like, oh crap, when they came across my desk, and I was like, this is not what I want to be doing. But I had to suck it up and make it happen and do the right thing to respond accordingly. And it was not popular decisions. There were not popular decisions. They did not all turn out hunky dory. Nope, did not. Makes me sad, but I stood on my convictions and doing what I knew needed to be done. That wasn't just an advocacy for myself, but it ended up being some advocacy for others involved. And we'll talk about that next week. But in making sure that if you've set boundaries about integrity, about your values, about your purpose, about the quality of the work that you do, that you make sure that those boundaries remain intact. And the only way to make those boundaries stay intact is to speak up in sometimes in defense of them, or on the offense positively about them as well. Okay. So, but seek that advice. Don't be afraid. Have someone check you before you send that email. I do that a lot. The old trick of write the email and let it sit in your inbox for a few hours or even overnight before you hit send. Okay. There are all types of things. Talking to other people who have a more objective viewpoint, right? If you have an accountability partner, if you have a coach, if you have a mentor, reaching out to those people or that person, and with confidentially, of course, depending on the situation, to get another perspective, so that you can respond in a way, again, that hopefully will allow for a sound and good result. But the point is to speak up, to be prepared for the next opportunity when something comes up. Because again, every time you exercise that muscle, you get stronger. It gives you the skill and the ability that you need in order to do it for the long haul and to build up for the next challenge that comes your way. All right. So you don't want to be hampering your ability as a future leader to address difficult situations. So start practicing, start engaging now, being more mindful of those opportunities, being more mindful of those situations, looking at, are there certain situations that maybe you're contributing to happening because you're not speaking up earlier in the process? Like there's all kinds of things to be learned from this. All right. But the point is that speaking up for yourself at work does not have to be taboo. It should not be taboo because we all have to do it at some point in time. It is absolutely necessary. When you have to bring in a third party to keep things from getting too heated, sometimes you got to do that. When you got to have a meeting with the person with the door open, I've done that before. With an assistant sitting outside, like, I'm gonna need you to stay till this meeting's over. Okay. So there are all kinds of strategies, all kinds of ways to approach it. But my main point here is to remind you that you are worth the effort of speaking up for yourself in your workplace, in the work that you do, whether it's in the community, whether it's in your business, ultimately, even personally, because those things feed over into each other, right? So I encourage you to think about that. Give some thought to it. I'd love to get your feedback on it and hear where your challenging points are. So maybe we can do a little follow up. I'd love to hear from you about that. Okay. So that's what we have for today on Speaking Up for Yourself, part two, when you're learning how or considering how you need to speak up and be an advocate for yourself at work. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care. I look forward to seeing you for coffee next week, and we'll keep things going. All right. Take care, and I'll talk with you again soon. Bye.